All right. Welcome, everyone, to the panel of the Valley of Death. Navigating these challenges, the Valley of Death in life sciences is basically the most critical challenge, or one of the most critical challenges that you find in life science and biomedical innovation, which is the gap between the early stage research and the commercialization of the later stage funding, or commercialization of new therapies, diagnostics, and medical technologies. So despite remarkable advancements in the basic research in that life science space, many promising innovations actually falter at this juncture. They're unable to progress due to insufficient funding, regulatory hurdles, and the inherent risks of validating these new products and developing them for commercialization. And our panelists today will discuss this problem as well as strategies that companies can use to bridge this gap. So I'm very happy to be here today with three esteemed panelists that know a lot in this space. We have Estia Ryan here. She's an investment principal at ECA Ventures, a 70 million pounds early stage impact fund investing across the health spectrum. Then we have Iman Askari, a senior client partner at Morgan Pestwich, a boutique executive firm in the life science and healthcare. He leads global engagement with investment companies focusing on VC, PE, family offices, and Middle Eastern clients. And with over 12 years in the financial services, Iman has worked in sales and distribution for various asset managers covering EMEA and more. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Ethan Papadopoulos. I hope I didn't butcher your name too much. He's a medical doctor with 20 plus years executive experience in research and development and marketing authorizations in big pharma like Novartis and Sanofi and Biotech. He was involved in NMAs, but also acting as board director in ventures and fund advisor. He's currently also a managing director at Microgreen, the company we've just seen here before, and that is a stem cell-derived regenerative therapy company. All right, so I would like to ask you each, as an opening statement, what your perspective is on this innovation-profit balance in life science to kick off with. So Estia, can you start saying a little bit about this in your personal story?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little to pick out on that intro, but we really focus on the entire spectrum of health. So starting with the social determinants, investing in access to education, then also looking at health behaviors, and finally health treatment. So a real focus on digital health and diagnostics. So that's kind of the perspective I bring here. But I just wanted to start with a couple numbers from the venture landscape of what this looks like in practice. So if you think about the cost of developing a drug, about 3% of that is in the target validation, or at the very front of the curve. And what actually VC funds is over 60% of their capital goes to that first step. So the first piece I want to say is that there's a little bit of a misalignment between what VC funds and actually what the cost of drug development is. The second piece is what's the most costly part of developing a drug. It's phase 1 to 3. That's about 60% of the cost of a drug development. Now, how much VC dollars go into that piece? It's about 15 to 20% of the total allocation. So what I want to bring with that is, again, this dislodge between VC investment and life science, life science kind of cost of sale or cost of business. Having said that, there are pockets of opportunity that I'm really excited about, and we'll kind of delve onto this later on in the panel, so I don't want to say too much, but areas like clinical trial research and facilitating that, areas like AI and drug discovery. So there are pockets of innovation where I think there might be better alignments between and health outcomes for patients, but also financial returns for venture. So that would be my opening statement.
Fantastic, thank you. Iman, how about you?
Thank you, Elena. So for us, being an exec search and headhunting firm focusing exclusively on the life sciences and broader healthcare, the sector itself has really been in a state of flux over the last 12 to 18 months, with 2023 really having been almost an annus horribilis, to use a Latin term, especially around the prospect of securing capital, especially in the private markets, for early stage companies. And this has therefore driven a sort of reduction or retrenchment, as it were, in terms of available roles for us to work on. And depending on your perspective of how we operate in the recruitment space, we are either lead or lagging indicators. And if there's lots of work on, well, it means the market is healthy, when of course, sadly, that wasn't necessarily the case last year, I hasten to add. But with that being said, if you trust and believe sort of the sentiments of the bankers, let's say at Jefferies and JPM, we are very much in a recovery phase. And as we all know in this room, markets are cyclical, so these take time. The recovery takes time to price into markets. And for those of you who are investors in the room, all I can say is that the only way is up, and to keep faith in the sector. And we should see a definitive reversion come the second, I believe, latter second half of this year. So it's worth keeping an eye on.
Great. And last but not least, Dr. Ethan, what's your perspective on the innovation-profit balance in life sciences?
Thank you for the question. It is, first of all, I would like to start with commending the organizers and the panel for the title, The Valley of Death. Now, jokes aside, this is indeed that you find ourselves several times, either as founders of companies or as investors, just before the edge. And it always comes down to, are we continuing to be innovative in some aspects, or do we continue with some trends or the profit or change course?
Yes.
What I would say is trust your instincts, keep true to yourself, and ask your advisors. There are many aspects, and we will hear and we will talk certainly more about it, but first of all, ask questions to the experts and trust your experts. Trust your experts. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good perspectives to start off with. The next question is, what are the main challenges in funding early stage companies through the valley of death from all of your perspectives? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start. I guess, so if you put yourself in our shoes, as a company, I think we see about 6,000 companies a year to understand what we're going to invest in. And out of those 6,000 companies, we'll end up actually investing in 5. So it's pretty hard to get venture funding. And that's at the front of the curve. So we invest right before the valley of death. So to contextualize this, there has to be something that really stands out to venture funds in order for you to, make us want to take a call. And so I'll give you a couple examples of what those are. So number one, having early senses of validation. Have you worked with many biobanks? Do you have early traction that you can talk about? That's one example. The second example is we love to do our due diligence on yourself as a founder. So what academic papers have you worked on? Where have you studied? What is the kind of innovation behind that? And the third, and I actually think the most important piece when we were talking about it before the panel, is the ability to learn. Like, how, as a founder, have you shown that you're able to kind of iterate and learn and show that you can build, not only incredible academic excellence, but also a marketing function, a product dev function, all of these pieces that don't always come with an academic background. So those are the kind of 3 things that we start to look for when we're investing at those early stages.
So you really have to excel as a founder and as a team in order to get through the valley of death from your perspective. Be good at the science, be good at the things that are coming, and be good personalities or good characters to invest in personally. That's very interesting. Other challenges that you two see, maybe more you could speak from the company side or from your perspective, Iman, that when it comes to funding these really early stage companies that are before the valley of death, basically.
You want to start?
Sure. Well, coming back to the point of sort of innovation and profitability, the two are intrinsically linked. And I think traditionally, if you look at larger pharma, they're not exactly known for their innovative platforms. And really where we see innovation being driven is at that early stage of the development cycle, which is really the client segment that we tend to focus on as an exec search firm. So if you take, for example, CRISPR technologies and how that has driven drug development, it's really sort of been a game changer, which was driven really by at early stage, which has then been adopted by large pharma. So that's what I would say on that.
From your side? Startup
I would
side?
say the startup side usually has to do in biotech, starts from academia. Let's be honest. Academia is the wealth of knowledge and the wealth of experience that comes together and brings something new. If there is something there, it will come from the different universities around the world. If you pick it up very early, or if they have their own drive very early, they will get there. Now, if someone believes in them, that's the point. First thing is you need someone to believe in you.
How do you
We
make them
have
believe?
strategic collaborations, KOL relationships, key opinion
Yeah,
leaders
good
all over
point.
the world, and a good plan, a good business plan, and a good development plan. So again, it comes down to you don't need only the people that will actually found the company. You don't need the founders. You need all the people that will come along, bring experience, and get to you in front of people like us today, and also know the regulatory environment, know the actual clinical development environment, and everything else that comes after that, the marketing, everything. If you reach to marketing, you're good to go.
Very good. Estia, from your experience, are there other strategies that will help bridge the gap?
Yeah, I think actually
can
just before
employ?
I answer that, I want to pick up on something that you said because
Yeah.
there's some new data last week around actually risk taking in Europe and the UK being very different to the US. So to me, it doesn't make that much sense that there's the same amount of UK universities in the top 10 global university rankings as the US. But if you look at the startups spun out of those universities, there's about a 5x lower rate in the UK compared to the US. And so I think we need to start, like you say in academia, about how do we start to help scientists and like the smartest people in our society understand the commercialization pathway. And that's a bit of soul searching that I think we need to do here in the UK, and a little bit of soul searching that we also need to do as investors and everyone in this room of, what is our risk tolerance and how do we increase that a little bit. And then,
Good point. I want to maybe quickly add to this. And how much would incubators or more university funding to actually also fund some of the routes towards commercialization early on, when maybe most VCs are yet too risk averse to invest in a very early stage discovery?
definitely, and I'd plug two organizations here. So one is the UCL Technology Fund that works with Albion VC. That's a really impressive, I can see some nods, but it's a really impressive organization that works with the university to commercialize. And the other organization that I met a couple weeks ago is something called Cambridge Future Tech that's trying to go on the ground and scout professors and understand, like open up their old IP books and get a postdoc to come and try to commercialize that organization. So there are like green shoots of this happening, I would say.
Great. Iman, we work a lot with human capital, right?
That's
How
right.
much can that be a factor of helping bridge the gap?
Well, I mean, it absolutely can be. I think going back to Estia's point, having looked at some data before sitting down today, the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge, and of course London, if you take a proportion of innovation that takes place within Europe, it's sort of 30% plus in this country, which is truly a remarkable figure because the second in the table or in the list is Switzerland on about 9 or 10%. So if you can, and this is where we come in as service providers, if you can source the right talent backed by the right science, then that is what drives innovation, which ultimately leads to profitability. And one theme we are finding is that, people, it's all about the science and the asset. And especially if it's a multi-asset platform as opposed to just a solitary one, that tends to encourage people and build enthusiasm when we position some of our clients who are in that early stage space.
That's a great point. I think that's another good strategy that you just said, multi-assets or platforms, human capital, maybe accelerators or bridging. What other strategies would you two add to the list? What companies or even VCs can do or recommend to bridge the gap?
Collaborations.
Collaborations, yeah.
Collaborations, definitely. And it could be collaborations between VC, a company, a founder, or other academia organizations like HR or health, human capital actually, not HR, but human capital. And this is where it all comes down in building the right team for the right purpose. You have to see the IP first, the intellectual property. You have to secure all the necessary background that you will need to move forward, at least on your first couple of years. Then you will end up in front of the regulators first, but not least, the regulatory environment. And of course, in all these stages, you need capital in order to move forward. Grants, yeah, okay. A lot of companies use and live and breathe only with grants. But we have to see the actual very, very breathing point of every company, which is the technology and the data, and that should be translated with enough cash to the next level. Anyway, yeah.
Yep. And what hasn't been considered yet, do you both see that future market size helps with balancing the risk? Are you willing to take more risk when you are investing if the potential is greater? Is that something you take into consideration at all?
So from an investment perspective, I think it's almost the flip. So we kind of take it as an assumption that the market is going to be huge, and we'll only invest if that's the case. Now, if the market is $1 billion versus 10 billion versus 100 billion, that's a rounding error because ultimately it's a really big market. But we do get scared when the market is only 100 or in that category. So I think we do our due diligence to size up the market, but it's not the most important thing for us. For us, the most important thing is, do you have really strong IP? Are you a really strong founder? And again, are you able to learn as a founder to grow into that ultimate CEO over time?
Makes sense. Imam, coming to the current life science market environment, how do you see companies balance the innovation versus profitability in the current scene?
Well, I think a lot of it, thank you. I think a lot of it is linked to funding because, in order to get through the clinic and proceed through the R&D cycle, the cost of which is enormous, you then, you have toxicology, you have proof of concept. And so there is this inherent sort of risk-off trade that's been prevalent for some time that we've touched upon already on the panel. And so, for founder CEOs to go to market with investment companies, be it PE, VC, or family offices, and of course, ST in this case, this is where, they've got to be able to be aligned with their investors, work in a collaborative fashion, secure said funding in order to proceed through the clinic, and therefore innovate, which then leads to profitability. And that is where we are seeing that's where we've seen this retrenchment and this slight reduction. And another theme is that for those preclinical businesses, they are securing less financing. It's all about data, preferably phase 3. And that is something we are seeing in the market, not just amongst the clients that we are seeking to help scale up, but also the investment companies coming back to us with who they are looking to allocate capital to as well.
Are you seeing licensing agreement being done earlier to bridge the gap, or IPOs happening earlier to bridge the funding gap as well, or not so much?
It's a good question. So coming back to the licensing piece, that's linked to sort of the multi-asset or multifaceted platform technology that these companies possess. I think in terms of the IPO market, if you're following news flow, there's always these sort of enormous, like headline-grabbing deals that are taking place, normally driven by large pharma. But what we are finding, and of course this is very specific to us, is that that is not reflective of what is happening on the ground with some of the organizations that we are seeking to partner with at early stage. So there is a sort of, I suppose, fundamental disconnect there between the top end of the IPO market and being able to access capital slightly lower down as well.
Thank you. So to all of you again, what are the recent developments that you see in life sciences that investors in the room should be aware of?
I might start. AI, it's always the big one. And all the buzzwords surrounding it, big data, which has been there for a while, and also the factor of new diseases that come up every now and then. So we had the coronavirus, we may have a disease X next, we may have the next big thing after that. Usually it comes in waves, and like everything working in waves, you have to catch the wave and be on it. But from the other side, this is exactly what we are discussing today. Is it the innovation? Is it the new? Is it something that you want to catch up with? So all your process or your work can be diverted and taken away from your original theme, or should it be on what is something that you have been doing and you know to do very well? To your question, the AI working now, the way that all data can be processed and moved forward, regulators have caught up with that. But the regulators, the regulatory environment in healthcare is what it should be. It's adamant, it's very structured, because health is the ultimate gift to us. So they have to be very, very strict. They're not moving. They're moving very, very slowly, and they will continue moving slowly. But there are chances with combinations and moving forward with artificial intelligence, all the data that has been all around the world from the clinical trials, and a combination between that, organoids that I'm using now, microorgans that are not actually, for example, coming from someone, but from cell cultures. Using all that, so again, innovation plus AI plus all the necessary regulatory.
Esther, what developments do you see in the life science sector?
Yeah, so there's three I'd call out. So one, we're thinking a lot about antimicrobial resistance as a theme. And I won't spend too much time on them, but the second piece is everything around speeding up clinical trials. Like, how do we get from phase 1 to phase 3 as quickly as possible? Is that tech-enabled? What are the limits to tech enability? And then the third one is, given that we've heard about all of this AI drug discovery at the front of the curve, like, how do we get that into patients' hands? And so there's this cycle of like AI and wet lab that needs to happen much more quickly that we're starting to see a couple startups doing. So startups will start to own the generation of IP, but then actually start to manufacture that themselves. And that's kind of unseen in the early stage side when companies are raising 1 to 5 million. How can that get you far enough to do the wet lab initial tests? But the thing I'd want to add is actually on the profit innovation dilemma is big pharma has come out of 3 years of hyper growth, and if their cash balances, although coming down a little bit now, have never been higher. And so we have a real discussion around who owns innovation. Is it the big pharma companies, or is it the early stage startups? And do early stage startups have to run 5 times as fast as they used to because of this unfair advantage that big pharma has? Now, we're fundamentally optimists about this. We wouldn't be in the business if we weren't, but it's just a slightly different perspective that I think investors have now compared to like COVID times or pre-COVID times.
Iman, anything to add to the list?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think keeping in theme with what the panel has been discussing around AI and actually bringing it to the end consumer, where we are seeing sort of significant growth, which I suppose could be part of the wider digital health theme linked to AI, which of course, as we know, has been prevalent for some time, is really in the wearable space. So I want to cite one example of a client that I'm working with, part based in the UK and part in Portugal with operations in both countries. They are, according to them, pioneering the first AI-driven or led wearable to monitor senior living or elder citizen wellness and healthcare, right? And I think that's such an innovative way of bringing something such as AI or ML to the end consumer within the context of digital health, and they are actively seeking to fundraise off the back of that and garnering quite a lot of interest.
Brilliant. How are these developments that we just heard are actually changing the landscape for all of these emerging biotech startups that are attending the event or outside of the event, from your perspectives? What do they now have to do differently or watch out for in particular?
Yeah, so maybe I'll answer that in a slightly convoluted way, but if you actually look at the public markets, some of the worst performing stocks have been drug discovery companies that listed in the 90s or the 2000s. Like, I won't name any, but you can think of the ones that I'm thinking of. And so because of that, how do you, again, it comes back to that point of like running 5 times as fast as you used to.
Yeah.
I think we try to de-risk that. So 1, it is harder, 2, it is riskier, and 3, it probably will take longer. And so the way that you de-risk that, we think at the early stages, is on that founder piece. So at ICA, we have a huge focus on founder development and founder assessment. We have a framework, and we use quite a few questionnaires to understand, like, think of it as a Myers-Briggs test of understanding your personality and your motivation. And so that, we think, can help build our conviction in you as a founder, but ultimately there's no going around it. Like, it is a really tough business that is getting harder. Maybe you have better thoughts on that.
No, it is, and I absolutely agree with you. It always comes down from the start. A lot of things can change during moving forward, evolving, changing, but it has to come from the start. The point where the change is happening. Thank you. The point where the change is happening is when the capital drops in. So until then, it's all about the founders. The capital drops in, a lot of things can change, a lot of things can evolve faster, a lot of things can get easier. Imagine being the big pharma, and imagine being the small startup, or even a small biotech, who has a better chance to do things faster. Nevertheless, the whole idea of innovation comes from the little ones, from the startups. Everything that a big pharma is getting to their IP is coming from the little startups. They are exploring, they are scouting all the time. I have done that. I've been there and I've done that. This is how it works. So think small, not think big, think small, but innovative, and get the right directions. Speak again with the experts and see who is there, what are they doing, and if they're doing it well, then you have a chance.
Sounds like speed is even more important than it ever was, and knowing the right people.
There you go.
Imam, anything else?
Yeah, just very quickly from our perspective. So on the point of founders, we would encourage them really to stay the course. And, coming back to the point around big pharma potentially stifling innovation, especially through being acquisitive of these smaller early stage businesses, if founders can stay in there and not sell out at the wrong point and drive innovation in that fashion, we would actively, in terms of how we approach our market, encourage them to do so, due in part because we don't do anything in that big or large pharma space, which is partly a quirk of history, and for some of us it's slightly more philosophical. But founder-led businesses driving innovation are really paramount for the industry and for the sector as a whole.
Great. So I want to finish by one last question round, which is in the regulatory and market consideration space, and then we may have a few minutes for questions if there are any. What regulatory and market challenges do life science companies face when they are bringing innovative products to market eventually? And how can investors assess and mitigate these risks when they are considering investments in life sciences at this earlier stage of company life?
Yeah, so I would say, to contextualize my answer, so we probably spend most of our time on digital health and a little bit of time on our life science work. So this is going to come from a more generalist angle. But the de-risking point, there's a couple things. So one that we always ask is access to proprietary data. Like, how have you trained, if it's a machine learning algorithm or an AI algorithm, how have you trained your model in a way that isn't replicable from another company? If it's a life science company, again, how have you validated that? So understanding the biobanks that you might have had access to, and the patient populations, do they reflect a diverse population group as well? Like, that's super important to us at ICA. And maybe the third piece that is more relevant in the middle stages of funding, but early commercial conversations, we think it's never too early to start speaking to, it's not acquirers, but it's people that will license the technology and start to really bring that to market. It doesn't even have to be big pharma, it can be distributors or SMEs, but just so we understand that you're thinking about how this is going to make money at the end of it, which is kind of the profit piece of this panel.
If I may continue to the same,
Please.
yeah, it is indeed how they are thinking, how the company is thinking, and if they have the right contingencies in place, the right clinical development plan, the right business plan, if we thought about it correctly. And for regulatory authorities, you have to check all the boxes. Now, if you are an investor and you want to see if something is going to be faster, you have to see fast track designations, orphan designations. Do they have something that in their portfolio? Are they a company that has a platform? Are they something that can be, given a priority voucher, which costs maybe 80 million if you get a priority voucher for a priority designation in the US? All that stuff, plus the fact that have they thought about the regulatory pathway correctly? That's the whole de-risking thing. If they have a lot of aspects, if they can move very fast, if they have started speaking with VCs, like you said, or other subject matter experts, and if they have the right people, here this is where you come in, Iman, everything then connects and they have a prospect.
Thank you, Athan, for teeing me up. I think adherence to the regulatory framework is very much driven by personnel and bringing the right people in, from a reg affairs perspective, and that is certainly an area that we have been active in for some time. What we would also advocate is regular engagement with the regulators, be it the EMA or the MHRA. It's a pity that the EMA has now made that exit, but obviously the UK regulator is very robust in nature in terms of how it seeks to conduct itself. So from an internal perspective, once again linked to the people side, it's about building and developing a sort of a compliance-led culture. And this is very much applicable within the context of life sciences as it is, financial services, which is the world that I came from, which in a post-07-08 world, you saw a massive sort of influx and increase in compliance-driven professionals joining industry. And that has very much been the case we've seen over the years with the clients that we are working with in the life sciences as well.
Fantastic. Now, before we wrap up and you give us a 1-minute summary of your key tips for investors when it comes to this value of death or related life science topics, I want to ask the audience, are there any questions? Yes, please.
So, Dr. Gross and Dr. Phillips, the United States has had the Theranos scandal with Elizabeth Holmes. The UK, Switzerland have not had such a scandal. At least I don't know of that. Your guidance to not just the founders but the investors that we must not have that kind of speculative, quote-unquote, investments where we push these founders to make the decisions that Elizabeth Holmes has made.
So from my perspective, I would say it's important to get third-party data. So for us, the university was running the trial, for example. So if you have third parties doing the data manipulation is way less likely, right? So Theranos they were doing the trials, right? And they were basically selling whatever. I think that's a big thing about it. If the company is in-house doing some kind of a trial, that should raise some red flags amongst the investors, I think. Having credible partners in getting the data, whether that is clinical trials or whatever field that is, from my perspective, I think is the most important around the credibility. Getting the raw data and having third party basically validate that this data is credible and not made up in that sense would probably help. What's your take?
I think that it is on the same aspect. Again, check with your experts. check with people that you trust. And it all comes down to, yes, in the US, there are many companies that they do their own trials. There are many companies that they have very good collaborations and they buy out the companies that they do the trials. But at the same time, don't forget that the company, it's all about the data, and it's not the trend, it's not the something big. Everyone went with Theranos because everyone else was going for Theranos.
Yeah.
This is what happened. So start thinking, and this is where I said start small. Asking the right questions at the right time, looking at the data, as you mentioned, looking exactly what they're doing, and if they have the potential. Yes, the trend, the riding the wave, I agree. But at the same time, the regulatory authorities will come in only when asked. They will not come in before. So it's all up to you. Yeah, it's all up to you before the time that they will have to tick the boxes.
And I think if somebody tells you it's too confidential to show the data, even after having signed an NDA, there's something wrong. That should be a big red flag. You are entitled to see the data and the raw data after signing an NDA, period. If you're a competitor, maybe a bit different, but if you're an investor, that's your right. So I would never even start looking into something more properly if you don't have access to the data. Yes, please.
Thank you. I would like to ask the panel, what's your view on the startup raising money in the early stages, especially in the current economical landscape? Because most of the time, they don't have enough data to raise a bigger ticket size, but they're not taken seriously if they're raising a smaller ticket size.
Yeah, this is a really good point and something that we think about as well quite a lot. So I think whereas in 2019 to 2021, it was all right, like that logic held true. So you wouldn't be taken seriously if you weren't raising a really large round. I think that narrative is flipped a little bit. So when we have a business model come to our desk, what we really do is understand how much you're raising and what that's going to be used for. And we build our own internal models of your cash burn. And so what we're trying to understand is triangulating, have you really thought about how much capital you need? Or are you raising a big round because you want to raise a big round? So I think there's been a shift of, again, I can speak to seed stage. So seed stage typically used to be £5 million rounds. Now we're seeing like £2 to £5 million rounds, and the variance is there. On the mega round size, so that's where the growth stage of venture capital, which is one stage after us, that's seen the biggest contraction. So I think the numbers around 100 million used to be around that stage, and now it's about 20 million. So I think at the early stages, it's actually still okay to raise that amount, but it's the next leg of growth. This is the panel, this is the next leg of growth where it gets a little bit trickier. But I would encourage you to really think about what that capital is being used for and communicating that clearly to investors.
Great. I think we have time for about one more question. Yes, please.
Thank you very much again for the panel. It was really insightful. I have a question. I was wondering, sort of what are the top technologies or applications of AI specifically that you've seen across the life science sector? You know, the ones that may have the most potential within the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, traditionally, sorry, I don't mean to jump in. Historically, it's been drug discovery platforms. And as I mentioned earlier, sort of in the piece, we are seeing novel and new applications within the context of wearables, platform, like tech platform type businesses, as well as SaaS businesses. So I think people or companies are employing AI and ML-led engines to streamline the clinical process, for example, for hospitals and healthcare providers. Also access to medical records and decentralizing that, whether that's blockchain-based or not. But that's really sort of in the broader realm of what you could call health tech and digital health. And that's where we've seen a real sort of influx and increase of that type of tech driving innovation.
I would also add gene therapies, where you can actually look at specific modules and how something fits in something else, something changes into something else. That is something an AI can do very, very quickly. And the fact that, for me, if there is a combination that will, yeah,
Sorry.
if there is a combination that would be very beneficial, and how I would do that startup is if you find a way to combine the preclinical with the regulatory, where everything comes down to the combination and moving it faster. If you have the data and you have something that you know it can work, if you combine data, biomarkers, or anything that is already there from other clinical trials, that it's kept anonymized everywhere, if you get that data and you could throw in your new things, new compounds or anything, and you scout if this works or if it does harm or not, then you have something that would be the next big thing.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're over time, but thank you for participating. Thank you for listening. And above all, thank you so much to our panelists who gave their insights. I'm sure they're around a bit longer, so you can catch them outside maybe to ask more questions if you have them. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.